Mike Owens here. Today I'm joined by Luke Thomas, one half of the award-winning Morning Combat and one of the finest fight analyzing minds in the game. Luke, the pleasure is all mine. How are things for you today?
It is everything's okay. By the way, how come with your accent you don't like grind your K? You know what I mean?
Hmm. I
The
will tell
Liverpool
you why,
accent,
Luke.
like they'll say cake. You know what I mean? There's like a little extra on the end there. You don't really do that heavy, do you?
I will tell you why, Luke, because unlike Darren Till, Paddy Pimblett, and Molly McCann, I have to try and sound audible to my audience. So I'm trying my best to not do what you're saying. Nevertheless, if I was talking to my friends on the street, I would be exactly like them.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. I didn't know how formal or informal it was, but that makes sense. Nice to talk to you again.
I've got you on today, as always. We're obviously at the start of the year. I think we did this 12 months ago, if memory serves, a kind of review of the years past and obviously a look forward into 2024. So, as you look at 2023 and the weird and wonderful year that it was, give me your overall assessment of the year in MMA.
I don't think overall it was a bad year. I think in overall I'd give it a good rating. I think there were a lot of good events. Obviously 2023 started out quite unfortunate in the way that the incident between Dana and his wife,
Mm,
that was not great. But I do think, I mean, there's just a lot of different ways to measure it. 2023 did not have a blockbuster event. It did not have this really larger than life, all eyes are watching MMA kind of event. There's a question about whether boxing had that. I think it got pretty close with
mm,
Spence Crawford or Tank versus Ryan, but nevertheless, MMA had a number of excellent moments at excellent events, UFC in particular, obviously. But I don't think it had a major blockbuster event. Obviously, Conor McGregor didn't come back. I mean, I think the biggest event for me, and your mileage may vary, would be Izzy knocking out Pereira in their
mm.
fourth meeting, whatever it was. I could barely keep track anymore. So there's a lot of positives there. I mean, the UFC churned out a lot of interesting content. There was a lot of, very, very solid events. There was also a lot of belly aching about how many events were in the Apex. That's going to continue. In fact, the trend across combat sports promoters for 2024, I think, is going to be that and then some. I would also say the death basically of Bellator, less so for our MMA purposes, Showtime Sports more broadly, but that
Mm.
obviously is part of the story too. But certainly and I know Bellator's not dead, but for all intents and purposes, the thing that Bjorn Rebney created,
Mm.
that Viacom slash Paramount then took over, that died.
Yeah.
They're keeping it and they're kind of repurposing it, but that thing came to its conclusion. And so I put it in those terms. Obviously, PFL vastly growing by the signing of Francis Ngannou. I think that was a huge story. Obviously, probably the number one story maybe all year.
Mm.
So there was a lot of things. I mean, I think in general, like just to wrap it all up, I know I'm meandering, but there were a lot of really good things. There were some definite bad parts as well. But I don't think it was as I mentioned, it wasn't this enormously great year, but pretty solid is the way
Mm.
I would put it.
You kind of took the word that I wanted to use for my next question out of my mouth in terms of the word moments, because if you had to look at it, if you had to give me, say, almost a couple of moments of the year, if you will, what do you think we'll look back on in 5, 10, 15 years' time and say in 2023, this happened? What do you think were the key moments that stick out to you?
Again, in the Octagon itself, it's got to be is he knocking out Pereira? That was a
Mm,
big one. That was a really big one. Of course, also, I mean, even if he ends up losing his next fight against Dricus Du Plessis, not that I'm necessarily predicting that, but just
mm,
as a hypothetical, Sean Strickland's win over Izzy will stand the test of time. That was a monster upset.
mm,
When I say that it'll stand the test of time, it's not by virtue necessarily of what he does next, but what he was able to do on that night, given the circumstances, was pretty remarkable.
mm,
I think that will stand the test of time. The formation of the TKO group, I mean, that may have been closer to 2022, but like it
mm.
really kind of got pushed forward as a real entity in this past year. I think that was a big part. I think that would stand out in terms of moments. The day Francis Ngannou signed with PFL was a big one
Mm.
as well. Um, I don't know that day will necessarily hold in the same way that the moment in time that any particular sporting result freezes you there will.
Mm.
But that was a enormously big one. The fallout of the Dana incident was I don't know, frankly, short lived and not that memorable at this point anymore, right? I mean,
Mm.
there's really no discussion about it at all. Um, and I don't think as interesting as Bellator emerging with the PFL is. I don't think there's any one day that necessarily stands out. I'm sure there's like some other moments and some knockouts that I'm missing. Obviously, Valentina Shevchenko getting choked out by Alexa Grasso is huge. I mean, there's a number of ways you could go in that direction. But for me, the Izzy one, I think, is the one that really crystallized the year in excellence, such that we had some.
Yeah, no, 100%. 11 new champions crowns across the year, if you include interim, vacant, and obviously full champions, moving
How many?
11 new
Oh,
champions.
Jesus.
Out of interest, off the top of your head, which crowning of which champion in any of those various aspects, interim, vacant, or full, which one surprised you the most?
Yeah, it's got to be the Sean Strickland one. I mean, just matter of factly didn't see it coming. Didn't anticipate it. Again, hindsight being 2020, the results reveal any shortcomings in the logic you were using to come up with that worldview, any biases in that worldview. It kind of lays them bare, and so it's helpful to look back and see what it taught a lot of us. I certainly was not alone in thinking that Izzy was going to win. That's a huge one. Again, I do really believe that his performance on that evening will stand the test of time. The way he really had not an overwhelming amount of offensive firepower. Not a lot of guys do against Izzy. But what a lot of them are able to do is just kind of have this. They kind of, we saw it in the Cannonier fight, or in the Romero fight, or the second Whitaker fight, where there's a lead he keeps on them, and then he just holds it for long periods of time. It was the inverse, basically, of that, getting knocked down as well. I mean, it was just a series of achievements where Sean Strickland's obviously a polarizing figure, and for good reason. However, if you are just judging on a performance basis and you didn't know who either guy was, and now you're going to the scorecards, I mean, the right guy won. The right guy absolutely won. The guy who deserved it, no doubt, because he did it over the course of the full 25 minutes. It was not some quick in and out.
Yeah.
And I think for that reason, you really have to give it to him.
I'll push you on that question, Luke, because I suppose that question was quite had an obvious answer with Sean Strickland. The fact that's everybody's upset of the year. If you had to maybe discount Strickland and go with another champion who surprised you of the crown, who would that be?
Ooh. Well, I guess in 2022 it would have been Leon Edwards, right? Because in 23 he had just the rematch and then that one, so it wouldn't be him. 205 that's a little surprising, but that division's also kind of a mess, to be honest with you. John Jones running over Gane, I thought, because that was maybe the best event of the year, UFC 285, I believe. The ease with which John just sort of not ragdolled him exactly, but just sort of ran over him. I mean, again, we learned in the end that Cyril Gane had some serious ground issues, but nevertheless, like at the time, you're like, what is happening here? So that was crazy. Dude, Moreno handing the title over to Pantoja, one of the most batshit things you'd ever seen in your life. Frankly, dude, also just to give Bellator a shout out, Patchy Mix. Yeah. I thought he would do well. I really did. Like you could tell, but the way he went in there and just dominated everybody was crazy each time, and it added the stakes every single time. But also, you know what? I didn't think that the first Islam and Volk fight was super close. I recognized that it was competitive and a great fight. And I thought he would win in the second fight a lot more easily, but even I didn't think he would go in there and just run over Volkanovski the way he did in that sense. So, man, this is what I mean. It's like you didn't have this moment in time where Ronda Rousey is getting every mainstream media outlet in the world to sit cage side to watch you, but you got a lot of great, excellent MMA, and part of that is just surprising, unpredictable moments. You got a lot of that.
I feel like this is kind of lends into my theory, which I have this theory about the last 12 months. It's almost been the year of the unlikely champion. I think when you look particularly at the Sean Strickland moment, you look at Alexandre Pantoja kind of taking that shine off the star that Brandon Moreno had built for himself over the last couple of years. You look at obviously Sean O'Malley doing what he did at bantamweight. You look at some of these champions, Leon Edwards defending the belt twice. I'm wondering if you agree with that theory about maybe the unlikely champion. And also, do you think when the UFC look at their current champion roster, do you think they are happy with their current set of champions in terms of the potential star power?
I want to be a little bit clear. When you say like unlikely champion, what would you mean unlikely?
I should clarify, unlikely star.
Oh, so someone who doesn't have the same kind of star power necessarily,
yes,
sort of winning out. Yeah. I mean, to me, that speaks about the product's authenticity, to be honest with you. I recognize that there are, in the long run, or rather short and long run, there are going to be consequences when a soft-spoken guy like Leon wins, and a big loudmouth like Colby loses. Again, there's a real question about how popular Colby is, but let's just assume for the sake of argument he'd be more popular for Leon, and then of course Leon wins instead. And you're like, what is the, at the box office anyway, or at the pay-per-view window, like what's the trade-off there? But I think really folks need to understand, like, this is real life, and it's very hard to, matchmaking partly is engineering, that is true, but at the highest level, when the stakes are the highest, there's not a whole lot. If the matchmaker is doing his job, there's really not a lot they can do to engineer it. Maybe they could put it in your hometown. There's a slight change of gloves or whatever. I mean, that's more so even in boxing, but there's really not a lot. And so you're going to get pretty authentic results, and that may not necessarily be what is always best for what the promoter wants. So in that sense, they probably are longing for various other results. However, dude, this tells you the reality of the sport. It is so difficult. And another thing I sort of point out is, one way is to say it's the year of the unlikely champion, the way that you're putting it. I don't think that's in any way an incorrect framing. I think that's probably pretty astute. However, I would also add, even with these guys, perhaps the common denominator across all of the results is going to be that even for very talented guys who win and take over in surprising, perhaps dramatic ways, even their reign is going to be short.
Yeah.
Like, it is extremely difficult. I think I would argue inside MMA, the most difficult thing to do is defend a UFC title. And maybe not so much at heavyweight, but certainly from, let's say, 170 and down, defend it 3 times. That is very, very difficult to do. I mean, to win it is hard enough, then fucking defend. I mean, these are really insanely difficult achievements. And so most guys can't even do that. They can't even get it. Even if they become champ, they can't defend it 3 times. And so it's just a reminder of how ephemeral success is, even for the very best guys. And also for guys like Demetrius Johnson, St. Pierre, Silva, and perhaps others, John Jones at light heavyweight, that reign, the amount of time they were able to have, that was a moment in time you may never see the likes of which again.
Yeah, no, 100% couldn't agree more. I suppose what I'd like to do next is maybe move from the past a little bit to the future. We obviously have 3 main event pay-per-views booked. We obviously have Strickland versus Duplessis at 297, followed by Volkanovski, Topuria, and then obviously Sugar Sean versus Chito Vera down in Miami in March. Of those 3 title fight main events, which one has you most excited or has you most?
Oh, this is easy. This is easy. Ilya Topuria and Alexander Volkanovski. I mean, this is easy. This is like that is so last year, excuse me. So last year, the fight in all of combat sports that I wanted to see the most was Spence Crawford, which I got to see, which was phenomenal. And then this year, I would say it's back to MMA. It's that one. Now, the reality is it's happening a little sooner in the year than I would like in terms of the building anticipation. As well, Volkanovski coming off of the head kick KO really changes the equation for me a little bit in terms of how I view it. We're not getting it under the kind of circumstances that I would prefer. You recall, for example, Spence Crawford was in late July last year. So you had this moment to build into the second half of the year. You don't have that here necessarily. However, you are talking about a guy in Volkanovski who has, in my mind, maximized both his physical and fight IQ tools. I think the kind of decision-making patterns he sets up, pattern switching, the way in which, in his words, he likes to scramble the brains of his opponents through all of this inability for them to ever really get a beat on what he's doing, and the highly complex and difficult ways in which he's able to make that work. I mean, every fighter's trying to do that, but the way in which he brings it to life is at another level. Going against this guy in Ilya Topuria, who has looked from the word go like someone you wanted to pay attention to, and at every stage has elevated what he's done in insane ways. And now also what is so exciting about him, win or lose, is the reality that we already know his power carries at 155 because he beat Jai Herbert and looked like he cut him in half with a punch. After eating a head kick and then surviving, by the way. Black belt in jiu-jitsu, had guys like Bryce Mitchell like recounting whether they even wanted to keep doing this after he handed down a beating to him, and then is representing this kind of like this burgeoning market in Europe. I'm sure you're well acquainted with this in ways better than I am, of Spain. And the Spanish have rallied around this guy in a dramatic way, showing up with Sergio Ramos, showing up with all kinds of major Spanish stars. This is a big market. UFC has not really tapped into it. There are other guys around him, Joel Alvarez and the like. And so it's this really brilliant moment showing you what success there is far outside the traditional powerhouses of, the US or Brazil or something like that. Look at these, what Oceania is producing. Look at what Spain is producing. I know he's Georgian, but still, obviously, the Spanish have embraced him quite fully. And it's this brilliant contest of what Volkanovski brings, and I think the physical tools, the excellent boxing, some of the sharp decision making of Ilia Topuria. Dude, it's fighting in MMA at not quite, but near its very, very highest level with major stakes between two guys who are extra capable. Yeah. This is exactly what you want.
Talking about star power, especially with Topuria actually has more Instagram followers than Alexander Volkanovski, but despite obviously never winning a title and obviously never defending a belt. And to that point, I also find the fight quite ironic that Topuria's nickname is the Matador, and yet he's probably fighting MMA's best Matador in terms of someone who can take the ball and can confuse them. It's a fantastic fight. What do you think are the keys to victory for Topuria in that one? Do you think that he needs to increase or add upon what he's already shown, or do you think he's shown enough to think he can get over the line?
I mean, I think well, okay, well, let's posit something. So, if there are any lasting effects, psychological or physical, from the head kick KO that Volkanovski suffered, then frankly, I don't think it's going to take Topuria's best effort, unfortunately for Volkanovski. If that's in play, I mean, he could just get clipped, and then in a way that he wouldn't necessarily suffer before. Now he is. Yeah. Who's to say, right? So let's assume for our own sake and for the fight itself, that's not the case. So in that case, what would the keys be? I mean, I really believe that you have to put physical pressure on Volkanovski. He is an effective mover. He's an effective rhythm disruptor. He's effective at maintaining distance himself. These are not very easy things to do. But I think if you did take a lesson there's a few lessons you could take from the Islam fight. One was, Islam at kickboxing range, he was effective at kickboxing range. I think Topuria is going to have to put even more pressure to get inside boxing range. But even at that range, what you noticed was he cut off motion one way and then was throwing strikes another way. So what it ended up doing was it created this pattern, these parameters, I should say, that kept Volkanovski in space and planted him. And when he was planted, well, then he had to make decisions about how to transfer his defense. And that's when all the problems began. You have to put him in that kind of space. You have to constrict what he is doing and force him to make a choice in space, rather than he's inside cut kicking you, disrupting your rhythm, exiting off at an angle, touching you with the jab, exiting off at an angle, taking you down, you get up, and really kind of accumulating points along the way. You have to take that away from him, otherwise you just can't win. And I think if I'm Topuria, it's heavy in your face behind the jab, put this guy on his heels kind of pressure.
Let's exclude Dricus du Plessis, Ilia Topuria, and Chito Vera for this next question. What I would like you to do is, when we look at the rest of the division, you look at the rest of the title pictures, give me a guy who hasn't held a UFC title who you think could win one 2024.
Okay, so how close do they have to be?
They can be as close or as far away as you like.
Ooh. It has to be a UFC title, right?
The UFC title. If I gave you a free £1 million bet, 2-1 odds, who would your money be on?
I will tell you, there's some interesting names out there. I think Jack Della Maddalena, he's got a fight against Gilbert Burns coming up. That's an interesting one to pay attention to. That's one I would look at. Obviously, at bantamweight, Umar Nurmagomedov, totally forgotten. He might come in this year and just start beating the brakes off everybody. That's another name. But if I had to give you the one name, it's got to be Shavkat Rakhmonov, right? Shavkat Rakhmonov looks like he's a destroyer of worlds. And I know that folks have said about certain things, there are things to pick apart. I mean, no fighter is perfect, and neither is he. There's lots of issues he has. He got tuned up just walking into range against Jeff Neal, and he couldn't take Wonder Boy down in the first round. But at the same time, 18 fights, 18 wins, 18 finishes, and doing it in ways that are very unusual. He has phenomenal, I think, next level positional control with ground and pound. He is absolutely unafraid to exchange. He has skills at boxing, kickboxing range, in transition, along the fence, from his back, on top. I mean, everywhere this guy's got something. His ability to finish is not in any way an accident. And I will tell you one thing more about him that makes him kind of exciting to me, getting back to Topuria kind of rallying and galvanizing Spain. And then same thing with Volk in Australia, whatever, Paddy in Liverpool to an extent. I don't know if you can tell me more about that. But in this particular case, man, look, you mentioned how many Instagram followers, dude. Rachmanov has already cleared 1 million. I mean, how many UFC fighters have more than 1 million? Not many. And he already has. And I'm already told he's the most, like, MMA is the most popular sport there. I mean, I guess soccer is the most popular, but like certainly among combat sports, it's MMA more than boxing. And I'm told by people around him that Shavkat is like super famous over there. Now, I'm getting, when Manny Pacquiao would compete, you would see, you know me, I've talked about this. There'd be like all this Manny Pacquiao traffic. Go look at any video about him. There's all these people writing in I guess, Kazakh. He is galvanizing that nation along the way, and it would only be great. We would only be richer for having their participation in MMA. Dude, keep your eye on that, dude. I don't know if he ends the year as champ, because it's hard to say how everything shakes out in terms of matchmaking. I would be very surprised if he doesn't wear UFC gold before his run is up.
Yeah, I interviewed Neil Magny before he fought Shavkat, and when I posted the picture on my Instagram, or the Instagram reel or something like that, my comments just flooded with the Kazakh flag. It's like his fans were looking out for Neil Magny content to promote Shavkat. I feel like it's kind of crazy. And how important do you think that is for a contender to have that fan base, as you mentioned there, with the likes of Paddy in Liverpool, or England more generally, or any of these international countries? How important do you think that is for a career of a contender?
I mean, it's the most important. Unfortunately, it's the most important when there's some way the promoter can directly benefit from it. So for example, there's a guy out of Liverpool, there's a guy out of Boston, and they would love to promote that typically to take advantage of it. I mean, UFC does a little bit less of that, but it's certainly in boxing, you see it all the time, where they really want, Mick Conlon has not necessarily been a super high achiever, but has been successful for the Northern Irish market, right? So it's something like that. So I don't know if the UFC has any plans to go to Kazakhstan or something like that. What I can tell you as an observer, when you see someone become a national hero, it does take on, like, a real national hero, right? It does take on a different level of significance. Number one, just because what it means to cover that kind of an athlete at that time, there's a certain level of history that goes with that, right? Because someone is doing something historic for that nation. But more to the point, what it then means generationally, like what seed is all of this planting for the future? And, Shavkat is very, very talented, but he's not the only good Kazakh fighter. There are many others on their way, and the kind of spillover effects that this could have in terms of growing the sport. And I mean, there's just so many ways it enriches everything, just your viewing experience, to watch someone this good, and then what it means for the rest of the sport, and then to cover history in the moment. Like, there's a lot of things. If they're from a place where you can then use that as a promoter to make more money, great. I don't know if Kazakhstan falls into that category, but in a lot of other ways, it carries significant importance.
And I suppose to that point, we've got to pay homage to Triple G, who maybe was the man before Shaq, because obviously in a different discipline, but obviously he became a massive star from that part of the world. Last question from me, Luke. I know you're a busy man. Very much appreciate your time. We couldn't have this conversation without talking about PFL, because they have, in many ways, kind of stole the conversation, certainly with the acquisition of Bellator, and also with the signing of Francis Ngannou. You've been very critical of I've seen online of their splitting up, if you like, of all the various leagues. So I'm asking for your opinion. What do you think are the keys to success for PFL to have success and to really kind of nail that number 2 spot in 2024?
What do you mean by success? Tell me what success means. It's an important question. I know it sounds like a loaded question, but it's actually pretty important. What do you mean by success? Well, what would success look like to you?
It's an open-ended question. I mean, I think the first thing for PFL, when you actually look at it, is maybe the size of arena that they can fill in terms of fan appeal. The pay-per-view division is obviously something they talk about a lot, so maybe trying to establish that, and also just trying to get a kind of consistent viewership. That would be the three.
Okay. So that's a great answer. On that level, I think they have there's a lot of potential. Right. We don't really know if Francis is going to fight in MMA in 2024. I tend to think he probably doesn't. But even if he ends up fighting a nobody, that's still better than what PFL has. Obviously, it'd be much better if they had a second name. It takes 2 names to promote a pay-per-view. They don't really have that right now, but that could potentially be something that's great for them. Jake Paul fighting on that card, or in any way for PFL, again, against somebody that people care about, like a Dylan Dennis or something. or whoever, that could be potentially big for them. I know they've signed they've signed Amanda Serrano and other things, like putting together some kind of event where that could pull 10, 20,000 people, right? Because understand something, they've pulled 20,000 when they went to France. They've pulled good cards when they went to the 3 Arena in Dublin. In the United States, though, I was at their one in my hometown of Washington, D.C. I think they had less than 3,000, and they were pretty happy with that. Like, it's tough to draw here, for that kind of thing. So if they can really solve that problem, that would be great. If they can get their numbers, solidly above 400,000 viewers, they typically hover 300,000 or below, and usually often sometimes below 200,000. That has to just sort of categorically change. But I mean, if you're splitting up your product and you're dividing it in the best way you can to raise money, but then not to really showcase, what the brand is all about, I don't really know how you're going to do that. But that would, to me, yes, that would make it as well. So, at the box office, on pay-per-view, these are really tangible things you could look at. But I don't want to leave your viewers and the viewers of this however they may find you, with a sour taste in your mouth, or depending on what your preferences are. But we need to be very clear about something. And I say it a lot, and people kind of like make me look at me like I'm the old man, at the bus stop, just yelling weird things. This was not an opinion that I've necessarily always had, but I have it now. And of anything I'm certain about in this world, it is definitely this. It is not possible for the PFL to compete with the UFC. It is not. It is actually, in the real world, not possible. It cannot be done. There is nothing that they can do to bridge that gap. So what we're asking about a successful 2024 for them, I think getting a little bit of luck, somebody defecting inside the ranks of the UFC, that would be just pure luck, to be honest. And going to be very difficult to come by. That would be good. The court case, the antitrust case, to me, is going to be one of the biggest stories to follow in the sport. That trial is scheduled for April. If that ends up having an effect, and there, of course, there could be challenges to any kind of verdict that goes against the UFC. But nevertheless, opening up that possibility of what that could mean, right? There's just a lot of ways that. Here's the reality, folks. Unless the United States Congress gets involved by passing the Muhammad Ali Act to MMA, or this antitrust case really railroads the UFC, or there is some kind of internal scandal or something that just makes the UFC collapse overnight, there is nothing that PFL, Bellator, ONE, or any other competitor out there can do to actually compete with the UFC. It is not possible. The way in which they control their contracts of the fighters, that reduce their mobility, it keeps them locked in for long periods of time. It has, and they control their titles as well. These two factors together, it makes any competition impossible. Guys, I saw the IFL try it. I saw Rumble on the Rock try it. I saw Icon Sport try it. I saw Elite XC try it. I saw Sengoku try it. I saw Dream try it. I saw Bellator try it. World Series of Fighting try it. I've seen everybody try it. You cannot develop your own side league without access to your guys being able to fight their guys. And that can't happen unless there is an antitrust enforcement or federal regulation finally happens in MMA. Because if that doesn't happen, it's only ever going to be the UFC. Guys, this is the one thing I want to I have to say this, dude. I know I'm going over my time, but I have to say this. If you look in boxing, right? Eddie Hearn promotes Matchroom and they make money, right? Golden Boy, De La Hoya, they promote and they make money. Bob Arum, Top Rank, and they make money. Frank Warren. I mean, I could go on and on and on. There's a bunch of guys who promote, and some of them have great fights. Al Heyman, whatever. Some have had bad fights, but they all kind of promote and whatever. You can like whichever one you like. MMA fans want you to believe there's only 5 guys in the world who can promote MMA, and they all work together and live in Las Vegas. They're the only ones who can do it, right? There's literally no one else in the history of MMA who can promote successfully except UFC, right? It's not that one didn't get a lot of money. It's not that PFL doesn't have a lot of money. Saudi Arabia has obviously a ton of money, or a wide distribution network with ESPN in the case of PFL. That doesn't matter. It literally does not matter unless you can get the contracts changed to force quicker free agency. it's a wrap, folks. It's a wrap. And I want you to when you fully grasp how true that is and how real that is, it changes your perspective about a lot. I hope PFL, to answer your question in a roundabout way, has a great 2024. I really do. They could have a much better 2024 than 2023, and 2023 was a good year for them, all things being what they were. But ultimately, I am telling you how this movie ends.
Yeah.
That's it.
Either way, I think what you're alluding to is either way, it's stunted growth, isn't it? You think they can have a good year, but relative to what they could have without the market control, it could be a great year. It could be an excellent year. It could be real change.
You can only make money in MMA if you have access to the top 5 guys. That's in each weight class. That's it. That's it. Everything else you can't survive. And they have basically all of them. And they have them because of the way their contracts work that don't allow them to seek free agency on a routine. I mean, this is the game. This is the entire game, folks. So, I hope they have a great year. It'd be nice if they had, PFL Liverpool and Francis fought on it, and it'd be awesome. But I don't think that's going to change their fortunes against the UFC.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And thank you for the insight, Luke. Luke, it's truly always a pleasure to get some of your insights, and especially to do these review shows where we look back on a year and kind of preview the next. So thank you as always for your time. You obviously visited my country last year, I believe in February, March. I obviously visited your country a couple of times. Hopefully, when one of us makes a trip to one of our respective countries, we can meet up the next time one of us do that. But if
I would love
to.
to.
Don't before then. Thank you as always for your time, and have a great rest of your time.
Thanks, man.
Make sure to subscribe to the LowKick MMA YouTube channel for all the latest news, event previews, and interviews with some of the biggest stars in MMA.